You know, at MotorTrend we get to drive a lot of cars in a lot of interesting places. We drive fast cars, we test cars. But one of the reasons that we love this job is that we get to do one of the best things you can do with a car, take a road trip. This is Adelaide, South Australia, and this is my hometown. I was born and raised here. We're about to start a really special road trip because we're driving from Adelaide through the centre of Australia to Darwin, nearly 3,000 miles. A road trip is the best way to see the world because you can see the country up close and personal. And this is going to be a special road trip because I'm going to show you parts of my country.
Any Australian can tell you where the Outback is. It's out there, somewhere beyond the coastal fringe of the country where most of the population lives. Beyond the chic cafe society of sophisticated cities like Sydney and Melbourne and Perth. Beyond the green halo of productive farmland that surrounds them. But the Outback is more than just a place. It's a state of mind. I saw for myself how remote and challenging the Outback was in the fuzzy black and white photos and faded Kodachromes my parents took when they drove a 1937 Dodge Coupe right across the country, from Adelaide on the south coast to Darwin in the north in 1955. The stories of that trip were family legend. More than half a century later, I'm about to relive the legend and reconnect with Australia's pioneering spirit. I'm heading north out of my old hometown Adelaide through lashing rain with photographer Julia LaPalme and videographer Jim Gleason in a Subaru Outback, a right-hand drive Australian spec version of our 2010 Sport Utility of the Year, with the 3.6 litre flat 6 under the hood. We're heading for Darwin. We're heading for the Outback. If you want a point where you can say the Outback physically begins, Goyder's Line, which we cross 400 miles north of Adelaide, is as good as any. Beyond this line, the rainfall averages 10 inches a year or less. South Australia's earliest settlers came up here in search of land in the late 1830s, planted their crops, and waited for rains that rarely came. The road to the Flinders Ranges National Park is dotted with ghost towns, Wallachra, Gordon, Kanyaka. Some little more than a sign and the crumbled ruin of what was once a sturdy family farmhouse. By US standards, the Flinders is a bijou mountain range. The Australian landscape is so ancient it has been eroded flat. The average elevation is just over 1,000 feet, and the tallest peak in the country, Mount Kosciuszko, 800 miles to the east, barely tops 7,300 feet. We turn off the blacktop just north of Wilpena Pound onto a little road I know that will take us through some of the most scenic parts of the park to our destination tonight, Parachuna. The heavy rains, which have swept unusually far north over the past few weeks, have left the road a sloppy mess. The Outback's scrabble for grip, thick, gluey mud flinging off the tyres. It's fingertip stuff through here. Caress the steering, squeeze the brakes, and breathe on the gas, because even with all-wheel drive, it's so slippery, we could be off the road in a heartbeat. There's wildlife everywhere. Grey kangaroos bound through the brush. Mother emus herd broods of chicks. Rock wallabies eye us warily. As we descend off the hills, the Outback splash through water and crawl over rocks as we wind along riverbeds between red rock walls and towering red gum trees.
We left our hotel in Parachuna before dawn this morning because today is a big day. We have more than 400 miles to do to get to Coober Pedy, and more than 200 of those miles we are on dirt roads like this. It's been a very wet winter in the desert this year, so although the going's been good so far, we hear north of Eyre, up the track, it's going to get a lot rougher and perhaps a lot muddier.
At Eyre, we're relieved to learn the Oodnadatta track is open, albeit only to high-clearance vehicles. With 8.7 inches of ground clearance, more than the previous generation Jeep Grand Cherokee, we figure the Outbacks qualify. We top up with gas and get underway. It's here that the sheer scale and the emptiness of the Australian Outback starts to register on my American colleagues. We'll see only a handful of vehicles over the next few hours, and when we stop for photography or video, the silence is eerily oppressive. At times, the road stretching across the gently undulating plain is the only sign of a human presence. To either side, there are no buildings, no power lines, no fences, nothing. We stop briefly by the southern shore of Lake Eyre. The unusually wet winter means the giant salt lake, where in 1964 Donald Campbell's Bluebird became the last wheel-driven vehicle to set the world land speed record, is full of water, something that has only happened 3 times in the past 150 years. We stop again about 10 miles south of Anna Creek Station Homestead, this time to plot our way through a giant mud hole. So far we've only come across a few muddy patches and some deep ruts, but nothing to faze the Subarus. But as we watch Chris's Land Cruiser, grey water halfway up its doors, slither for traction, it's clear we're going to need an alternative path. The upstream side of the mud hole is a mess, but a couple of prods with a stick suggests a firm gravel base under the silt on the downstream side, though a nasty gutter midway means we can't race through the soft stuff. The Outbacks scrabble a little for grip in the silt, and the front bumpers bounce off the gutter, but we're back on the road without trouble. We stop at William Creek to take a scenic flight out over Lake Eyre. The lake's filling is such a rare event, it's an opportunity we simply cannot afford to miss. As we fly out over the lake, water stretching off to the horizon, we notice wildlife teeming around the shores. On landing, we head off to Coober Pedy, arriving in the Opal mining town just after nightfall, and check into the Comfort Inn.
It looks like I'm standing in a mine shaft. Actually, I'm standing in our hotel. It once was a mine. We're here in Coober Pedy, the Opal mining centre of Australia. And the ingenious locals have turned their old mines into homes. There's a very good reason for that, because here in the summer, temperatures reach as much as 140 degrees. It's a very comfortable place to stay, just don't ask for a room with a view. Well, we've got another long day ahead of us. Nearly 500 miles right into the iconic heart of Australia. We're on the Stuart Highway, a sealed 2-lane that is the only link between South Australia and Northern Australia. A few years ago, this road was still dirt. It's nice and smooth now, but it's a long drive. We're heading into the Northern Territory, where we'll turn left and take the back road into Uluru.
When Mum and Dad came this way in 1955, the Stuart Highway was a meandering track through the scrub, and heavy rains meant it took 8 days to cover the 1,000 miles between Adelaide and Alice Springs. Their old Dodge frequently stuck in the mud. I think about that as we roll along the bitumen towards the Northern Territory border at 80 miles an hour. The Outback's 3.6 litre flat six humming along at a relaxed 2,450 RPM. Just over the border, we turn left off the bitumen and back onto the dirt, heading west into red sand country. The wide, sandy Mulga Park Road is the Outback track from Central Casting, a vivid red gash through green scrub and yellow spinifex, set against a peerless blue sky with soft violet hills in the background. There's still plenty of water around. Every so often we have to slow and skirt around large pools in the centre of the road, sometimes with cattle standing around them. But the rain has tamped down the sandy surface, giving us good grip and relatively little dust. Before long, we're cruising at 70 to 80 miles an hour, skimming over the top of the corrugations, and though it gets a little rougher and dustier near Curtin Springs, with occasional limestone outcrops peeking through the sand, we make great time. There's something special about driving long distances on roads like this. You have to concentrate the whole time, picking the best line around the bumps and rocks and gutters, as well as watching for wandering cattle and blundering wildlife. You developed a heightened sensitivity to grip and balance as the car moves around over the surface, and you feel so much more part of the landscape than you do on a regular highway. We all get out of the cars at Curtin Springs grinning. Uluru National Park is home to what is perhaps the most iconic symbol of the Australian outback, the brooding stone monolith known as Eyre's Rock, or Uluru to the local Pitjantjatjara Aboriginals.
Well, here we are, Uluru, right in the centre of Australia, and for many Australians, the iconic symbol of the outback. This sandstone monolith stands 1,142 feet above the desert floor and is 5.8 miles in circumference. It's a sacred place to local Aboriginal tribes and also to many Australian city dwellers.
The rock changes personality as the light fades, turning from orange to red to purple. And we linger until there's only a faint glow of light in the west, and the stars start to sparkle in the clear desert sky. As the night chill begins to sweep across the dunes, we all fall silent for a moment. This is a spiritual place. I have mixed feelings about Uluru. Back in 1955, my mum and dad were the only people here. There were no permanent buildings of any kind, not even a campground of any sort. And when I was last here in 1973, the place still had a frontier spirit to it. Now the tourists jet in and stay at the lavish Uluru resort, or drive their Toyota rentals down the bitumen from Alice Springs. The road around the rock has double yellow lines and no parking signs, and is crawling with giant air-conditioned tour buses that stop at that handful of places tourists are now allowed to get close to Uluru itself. It's like Outback Disneyland. After a morning at Uluru, we head east, back along the Lasseter Highway past Curtin Springs, to pick up the Luricha Road, a sealed two-lane that will take us northwest to Kings Canyon. But just 20 miles or so up the Luricha Road, Chris slows the Land Cruiser and turns off the blacktop along a narrow, scrub-lined track. A few minutes later, we join what had once been the main road from Alice Springs to Eyre Rock and start heading north. This road probably hasn't seen a grader in 15 or 20 years and is riven with steep ruts and washaways. For 25 miles or so, we do some serious off-roading. Take care with your wheel placement, watch your approach and departure angles, and it's amazing where the Outback will take you. We stop by an old boar and stockyard, near where the original Angus Downs Station homestead once stood.
For the past 5 miles or so, we've been giving the Subarus a pretty good workout as we've negotiated washaway creeks, rocky outcrops, and narrow tracks through the scrub. But here's the thing, we're on the road that my parents took in 1955 when they drove from Alice Springs down to Eyre Rock. It's changed a lot since then, although I'm getting a sense of the adventure that they went through 55 years ago.
Your mum and dad probably stopped right here on the way back from Alice Springs in 1955, says Chris. And in an instant I could see an old black and white photo from the family album. The Dodge stopped, driver's door open, and mum sitting on the running board, enjoying a hot cup of tea. I don't think that photo was taken here, but the nostalgia hit was overwhelming. The sun's getting low in the sky by the time we rejoin the bitumen, and as we have a dinner date under the stars, we put the hammer down and hustle for the last 60 miles to the Kings Canyon Resort. Just minutes ago, the Outback had been tiptoeing through the rough stuff. Now it's cruising effortlessly at 100 miles an hour. This car's bandwidth is impressive.
One place my parents didn't visit on that 1955 trip was here, Kings Canyon. Back then it was simply too remote, too far away, and too rough a road to get into. Now there's a paved road that brings 600,000 visitors to this magical place. Remarkably, it's still very pristine, very much wilderness country, a spectacular place.
Kings Canyon is home to thickets of palms and cycads and many species of native animals that drink from the cool waterholes. The Luricha people have lived here for at least 20,000 years, but the place was unknown to Europeans until explorer Ernest Giles came through here in 1872. Our destination today is Alice Springs, a town of 27,000 souls situated on the Stuart Highway almost midway between Adelaide and Darwin, and it's the largest settlement for almost 1,000 miles in any direction. We're taking the scenic route through Hermannsburg along a road that heads north, then east along the McDonald Ranges. Though dirt, this is a well-travelled route, and the signs in German, Japanese and Italian warn the tourists that gravel requires a careful driving technique.
Most visitors to Kings Canyon take the bitumen road back to Alice Springs. Not us. We're going around the western edge of the park on the Mamatjira Road back into Alice Springs. It's several hundred kilometres of dirt, and in places it's quite rough because it does see a lot of traffic. We've had more cars on this dirt road than any other road we've been on so far.
We turn off the road near Hermansburg to take a detour into Palm Valley on a track marked four-wheel drive only. The 18 miles or so into the campground takes us an hour. The route basically follows the bed of the Finke River, one of the largest in the Northern Territory. The Finke starts in obscurity and finishes nowhere in particular, running some 370 miles from the McDonnell Ranges southeast to the western edge of the Simpson Desert. The Subarus tackle the deep water, loose rocks and fine sand without raising a sweat and easily crawl their way over rocky outcrops. With all the recent rains, there's plenty of water in the Finke and the waterholes in Palm Valley are full. The tropical palms in the valley look incongruous. They look like they belong in Los Angeles or Florida or parts of Hawaii, yet they are a native species, living remnants of an age when Central Australia was a tropical paradise millions of years ago. Alice Springs was founded in 1870 as a repeater station for the overland telegraph line that linked Australia with the rest of the world. When Mum and Dad lived here 55 years ago, fresh milk and vegetables arrived once a week on the train from Adelaide. Today, Alice Springs is a bustling community with all the modern conveniences you'd expect. And that's not necessarily a good thing. We see our first McDonald's and our first traffic lights in 5 days of travelling. Today should be a straight 315-mile haul up the Stewart Highway to Tennant Creek. But to make things interesting, we're going to head west along Namatjira Drive, going out as far as the edge of the Tanami Desert, before looping north and then east to rejoin the Stewart Highway just 10 miles north of Alice. It's a 230-mile detour, but worth it for the spectacular views of the McDonnell Ranges that inspired the Aboriginal painter, and a distant glimpse of Goss's Bluff, a giant impact crater 140 million years old. Out here we cross the Tropic of Capricorn, the line that marks the most southerly latitude at which the sun can appear directly overhead at noon. Red deserts still rushing past the windows of the Outback, but we have officially entered the tropics. We turn right onto the Tanami Road and onto the Blacktop. Had we turned left, we'd be back on the dirt again within 10 miles, heading through the heart of the Tanami Desert for Halls Creek in Western Australia, some 600 miles away. Within a few miles, we spot feral camels grazing by the roadside. Before the rail link between Adelaide and Alice Springs was completed in 1929, thousands of camels, imported mainly from India, were used to transport goods across the desert. These descendants of those original pack animals have thrived in Australia. 1 million wild camels are now estimated to roam the Outback, the largest wild population in the world. Joining the Stewart Highway, named after John McDowell Stewart, the first explorer to cross the continent from south to north, we turn north again, heading for Tennant Creek. When Mum and Dad's Dodge rolled along here in 1955, the road was virtually a single lane the whole way. The whole road's been remade and surveyed since, but it's still only a 2-lane blacktop, and it's not that busy. We see just 22 vehicles in an hour.
The wide open spaces of the Outback might seem empty and desolate in places, but they're a hive of economic activity in Australia. There's a lot of cattle stations out here, ranches if you like, and some of them are huge. The biggest one, Anna Creek Station, is about the size of New Jersey. We're on Napperby Station at one of the cattle yards here, and these cattle yards are significant because they have one every 10 miles. There are dozens on this station alone. And what they do is they use the water pumped into that trough there to manage the cattle. There are no fences on this station. So what they do is they turn the water off when they want the cattle to go to the next bore and eat the feed around there. High tech has come to the Outback too. In the old days, the windmill would have pumped the bore water from under the ground into the trough. Now you'll see they have solar panels for the electric pumps.
It was a bracing 43 degrees when we rolled out of Alice Springs early yesterday. This morning in Tennant Creek, it's a balmy 72. We're definitely in the tropics. It's a straight shot up the Stewart Highway today, 400 miles of what should be the easiest travelling we've done so far. Our first full day with no dirt roads. There's more traffic today, including a lot more road trains. Imagine an American big rig with another 2 trailers tacked on the rear. That's a road train. These super-sized semis are about 175 foot long nose to tail with 16 axles and 62 tyres all up and weigh 120 tonnes fully laden. The prime movers are usually top-shelf American stuff. Australian assembled Kenworths and Max rule out here. with 500 and 600 horsepower diesels under the hood. The truckies have these babies running at 60 miles an hour whenever they can, which means overtaking one takes patience and planning.
You know, travelling in the Outback is a lot like sailing around the world in a small boat. You've got to plan your trip from island to island, or in this case, from gas station to gas station. Even here on the Stuart Highway, gas stations are few and far between. We've done about 250 miles since leaving Tennant Creek this morning, and we've just gone past the Daly Waters Roadhouse. And a little sign just past Daly Waters says, next gas, 100 miles. Now our trip computer's showing we've got maybe 120 miles worth of gas left. It's going to be tight, but we should make it.
We take a 20-mile detour out to Katherine Gorge, a spectacular chain of 13 waterholes carved deep into sandstone rock by the Katherine River. The river is a raging torrent during the tropical wet season, November through March, but we have to walk over rocks between our boat rides on the two closest waterholes. Katherine Gorge is sacred to the Darwin Aborigines, who call the place Nipmillock. As we drift noiselessly on the tranquil water between the towering rock walls, it feels like we're in a cathedral.
Well, it's a steamy 100 degrees here in Katherine. We're definitely entering the tropics. And here in the tropics, they do the weather backwards. It's winter, that means it's the dry season. It rains in summer, which the locals call the wet. And when it rains here, it really rains. The Katherine River here can run 60 feet deep in the wet, almost touching the underside of that railway bridge behind me. It's a nice looking river, that Katherine River, but you don't want to go for a swim. You see there's crocodiles in there.
This is Crocodile Dundee country, literally. We turn off the Kakadu Highway just past the Mary River Roadhouse and onto the dusty, badly corrugated road to Gunlom Falls. Several scenes from the movie were filmed right next to the main waterhole. There are signs at every river and creek crossing up here warning of saltwater crocodiles. And the warnings are no joke. 1 or 2 people are killed by crocs up here every year. The irony is the saltwater crocodile was nearly hunted to extinction in the early part of the 20th century. My dad, who drove to Darwin with a buddy in 1953 to shoot saltwater crocs, often says, "Fortunately, we never found one," and he's only half joking. Now a protected species, big males often reach 20 feet or more in length. We get up close and personal with our first crocs at Yellow Water, where a sunset cruise on the wetlands of the South Alligator River reveals an astonishing array of wildlife. Mostly the crocs are catching the last rays of the sun on a mudbank, but every so often one slides gently into the water and glides noiselessly alongside our boat, mere feet away. The crocodile hasn't changed all that much since dinosaurs roamed the planet, and it's a chilling experience to come eye to eye with one of these primordial killing machines.
Well, we passed the 3,000 mile mark in our journey, somewhere here in Kakadu National Park. It's a very different place from where we started out in Adelaide. The landscape's different, the wildlife's different, there are crocodiles in the creeks, it's hot and steamy. It really does feel like we've crossed a continent.
The Jawan Aboriginals call parts of Kakadu sickness country. They knew that if you camped too long at the wrong waterhole, spent too much time hunting in the wrong place, you would get sick and die. What they didn't know was that this whole area is rich in highly radioactive uranium ore. At one point, there were 13 uranium mines scattered through here. Now there are just 2, the Ranger and Jabiluka mines near Jabiru. It's a hot and steamy 84 degrees as we roll out of Jabiru at 8 a.m. We turn off the Arnhem Highway and onto a back road that will take us to Adelaide River, back on the Stuart Highway. The road is wide but badly corrugated in places and extremely dusty. Occasionally we hit a patch of what Aussies call bull dust, powder so fine that it explodes around the car and penetrates past even the best door seals. There's a fine film of dust all over the Outback's dash as we approach the Margaret River crossing, where in the wet there can be water 30 feet deep, barrelling across the road.
This is a piece of the original Stuart Highway. For more than 30 years, this narrow ribbon of bitumen is all that linked Alice Springs with Darwin. The road was sealed during the war because the rail line stopped at Alice Springs and the armed forces needed a reliable all-weather link with Darwin in the north. At the time this road came into being, the Japanese were in Papua New Guinea and bombs were falling on Darwin. This road was vital to move men, munitions and supplies to the front line just up there. In America, the termites like to move into outhouses. Out here, they like to build their own. Giant termite mounds like this are everywhere throughout the top end, towering testaments to one of the outback's most industrious critters. There are a couple of different varieties of termites that build different kinds of mounds. This is a cathedral mound, so called because it looks like a cathedral. Another variety of termite, found a little further up north, aligns its mound along the north-south axis. It's not because it's got a compass, but because each side of the termite mound is exposed to the sun, and it sets up a reverse cycle air conditioning system, all natural. Very clever guys.
I'm leaving early because I want to catch up with my brother in Darwin, whom I haven't seen in 12 years. The others will linger and take their time checking out a couple of waterholes in the Litchfield National Park before heading out to our final destination. It's hot and steamy again, and the clouds are building up to the north as we roll out of Bachelor. The wet season could be arriving early. The road into the park is a driver's delight, twisting and winding and swooping and sweeping through the hills, and at this time of day, it's utterly deserted. I make the most of the Outback's paddle shifters, flicking through the gears to keep that smooth 3.6 litre flat six thrumming happily in the middle of its meaty torque curve. I rejoin the Stewart Highway just 20 miles south of Darwin, and before long I'm rolling through what counts as urban sprawl up here. After almost 3,500 miles, nearly a quarter of that on dirt and only 40 on freeway, it really does feel like I've crossed a continent as I pull onto the pier overlooking Darwin Harbour. It's hot and steamy, but it feels epic.
Well, here we are, Darwin, and sadly, the end of our amazing road trip. When my mum and dad arrived here 55 years ago, Darwin looked like a frontier town. Today, it looks like a modern tropical metropolis. But Darwin's still a frontier town because you have to cross the outback to get here. We've driven through ancient landscapes and wide open spaces that incredibly were first seen by European explorers less than 150 years ago. We've crossed a continent to get here, and it feels like it's been an adventure.